Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Cameron always believed trust was the foundation of any marriage. At 32, he worked as a civil engineer at a mid-sized company, handling infrastructure projects that demanded precision and attention to detail. Natalie, his wife of the same age, was a physical therapist at a well-known private clinic, treating patients with orthopedic injuries and post-surgical rehabilitation. They'd been married for 5 years, lived in a comfortable house in the suburbs, and though they didn't have children, they shared plans to start a family soon. Their routine was stable. Cameron left early for the office, Natalie had flexible hours at the clinic, and evenings were reserved for home-cooked dinners, TV shows, and conversations about their day. Everything seemed to run perfectly, like a well-executed project. Cameron never had reason to doubt Natalie. She was devoted, affectionate, and always showed genuine interest in his life. He took pride in the marriage they'd built together, a partnership that seemed unshakable. Tuesday morning started like any other. Cameron was in his home office reviewing blueprints for a new residential project when he heard Natalie rushing down the stairs. She entered the kitchen, grabbed her bag, and called out a quick, "Bye, love," before heading out the front door. The sound of the door closing echoed through the empty house. Cameron kept working, focused on the structural calculations that needed to be finished by day's end. About 20 minutes later, he decided to take a coffee break. As he walked into the kitchen, he noticed Natalie's phone on the counter, plugged into the charger. She'd forgotten it. Cameron picked it up, intending to call and let her know, but then the screen lit up with a notification. He glanced at it instinctively. It was a message. A photo of a hotel room appeared on the screen, modern and tastefully decorated, with a king-size bed covered in pristine white sheets. Below the photo was the message, "I'm already waiting for you." The sender was listed only as D, with a heart emoji next to the name. Cameron felt something strange in his stomach, a discomfort he couldn't immediately name. He stood there, staring at the screen, trying to process what he'd just seen. Maybe it was one of Natalie's friends, he thought. Some inside joke he didn't understand. But the message felt too intimate, too personal. He left the phone where it was and returned to his office, but he couldn't focus on the calculations anymore. The image of the hotel room kept replaying in his mind. Who was D? Why was someone waiting for Natalie in a hotel? He tried to push the thoughts away, to rationalize, to find innocent explanations. Maybe it was work-related, a clinic event, a meeting at a neutral location. But the language of the message wasn't professional. It was personal. It was intimate. The next few hours were silent torture. Cameron tried to work but reread the same page of calculations at least 10 times without absorbing anything. He knew he was being paranoid, but he couldn't help it. The trust he'd always had in Natalie began to crack, like tiny fissures in a structure under pressure. He picked up her phone again, looked at the locked screen, and felt a growing urge to unlock it. He knew the password. Natalie had never hidden anything from him. They'd always had a relationship built on total transparency, or at least that's what Cameron believed. He typed in the password, their wedding anniversary, and the phone unlocked immediately. His heart started beating faster. He opened the messaging app and looked for the contact labeled D. When the conversation appeared on the screen, Cameron felt the floor vanish beneath his feet. Months of messages unfolded before him. Daily exchanges, sometimes multiple times a day. Good morning texts filled with romantic emojis, good night messages with declarations of love, intimate photos shared between them, short videos Natalie had recorded just for D, detailed plans for hotel meetups, discussions about how to hide the affair, and references to "that idiot husband of mine who suspects nothing." Cameron read everything. Every word, every photo, every video. His hands trembled as he scrolled up through the conversation, discovering the affair had been going on for 8 months. 8 months of lies. 8 months of betrayal. 8 months during which he'd come home every night thinking he had a happy marriage, while Natalie was building a parallel life with another man. He learned that D was Dylan, an orthopedic doctor who worked at the same clinic as Natalie. They'd started as colleagues, then became friends, and quickly escalated into something more. The messages revealed details that cut deep: lunchtime trysts at hotels near the clinic, sex in Dylan's office after hours, elaborate lies Natalie told Cameron about working late or covering extra shifts. Cameron remembered all the times she came home after 9 at night, saying she was exhausted from a long day. He remembered the times she said she was helping a colleague with a difficult patient, when in reality she was in a hotel room with Dylan. He remembered the messages she'd sent him during the day saying how much she loved him, while minutes later sending identical messages to her lover. What hurt the most were the conversations where Natalie mocked Cameron. She complained about his predictable routine, made fun of his habits, and joked about their sex life, which he now realized had been unsatisfying for her. Dylan responded with laughter and disparaging remarks, feeding her disrespect. There were messages in which Natalie said she was tired of pretending, that she wanted to be with Dylan for real, and that they were planning a future together as soon as they sorted out their marriages. Dylan promised to leave his wife, promised they'd be together, promised a new life away from everything. And Natalie believed him. She was willing to destroy her marriage for the empty promises of a man who, according to the messages, clearly told her whatever she wanted to hear just to keep her around. Cameron spent the rest of the day rereading the conversations, trying to understand how he hadn't noticed anything. The signs had been there, he realized that now. The times Natalie seemed distracted during conversations, staring at her phone with a smile he'd assumed was innocent. The times she showered as soon as she got home, before properly greeting him. The new lingerie she'd bought, claiming she was just taking better care of herself. The excuses about being too tired for intimacy, when in reality she was saving her energy for Dylan. The different perfume he'd noticed a few times, which she'd said was a gift from a grateful patient. It all made sense now, like the cruel pieces of a puzzle falling perfectly into place. By 6 o'clock that evening, Cameron was emotionally drained. He'd cycled through every emotion: initial shock, denial as he searched for alternate explanations, rising anger with each message he read, deep sadness over the betrayal, and finally a cold calm that came from absolute certainty about what he needed to do. He didn't want dramatic confrontations, didn't want shouting or hysterical accusations. He just wanted Natalie to know he knew. He wanted to see the realization dawn on her face when she understood the charade was over. He picked up her phone and placed it on the coffee table in the living room, right in the center, impossible to miss. Then he sat down on the sofa, facing the front door, and waited. Natalie arrived at 7:15, 15 minutes later than usual. Cameron heard the key turn in the lock, heard the door open, heard her footsteps in the entryway. She walked into the living room still taking off her coat, already starting to talk about how hectic her day had been, about a difficult patient who'd complained about treatment, about how hungry she was. Then she stopped. She saw Cameron sitting motionless on the sofa, staring directly at her. She saw her phone on the table. Natalie's expression changed instantly, from casual tiredness to confusion, then to worry, and finally to pure panic as her eyes locked onto the unlocked device with the conversation with Dylan still open on the screen. Cameron didn't say anything at first. He simply picked up the phone and held the screen toward her, letting Natalie see exactly what he was seeing. The messages were there, exposed, impossible to deny. Natalie went pale. Her bag slipped off her shoulder and hit the floor with a dull thud. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Cameron finally spoke, his voice calm and controlled, a stark contrast to the emotional whirlwind he felt inside. "I found out who was waiting for you at the hotel." The words came out simple, direct, weighted with a gravity that made Natalie stagger as if she'd been punched. "Cameron, she started, but her voice broke. Her legs seemed unable to support her. Natalie collapsed to her knees in the middle of the room, her hands trembling, tears beginning to well in her eyes. Please, let me explain. Please. Her voice was desperate, shattered. Cameron remained seated, watching the woman he loved crumble before him. Part of him wanted to comfort her, an old instinct to protect the person he'd promised to care for. But a bigger part, a wounded, betrayed part, stayed cold and distant. There's nothing to explain, Natalie, Cameron said calmly. I read it all. 8 months of lies. 8 months of you treating me like a fool. 8 months of you laughing at me with him. Each word was deliberate, each sentence a sharp blade. Natalie sobbed, trying to crawl toward him across the floor. It was a mistake. A terrible mistake. I don't know what came over me. Dylan manipulated me, he said things, he made promises, and I was weak, so weak. But I love you, Cameron. I really love you. All of this was madness, just a phase, it was. It wasn't a phase, Cameron interrupted, his voice still controlled but edged with steel. It was a choice. Every single day for 8 months, you chose him. You chose to lie to me. You chose to betray me. This wasn't a one-day mistake, Natalie. It was hundreds of conscious choices. He paused, letting the words sink in. And worse, you mocked me. You laughed at me with him. You made jokes about our life, about our marriage, about me. That wasn't manipulation. That was cruelty. Natalie was crying uncontrollably now, her body shaking with violent sobs. I'll end it with him. Right now. I'll call him and end it all right in front of you. I'll do whatever you want. I'll quit my job. I'll switch clinics. I'll never see him again. Please, Cameron. Please, just give me a chance. Don't throw away 5 years of marriage. Don't throw away everything we've built. She reached out her hands pleadingly, trying to touch him. I'll go to therapy. I'll do whatever it takes. Just give me a chance to fix this. Cameron looked at her, really looked, maybe for the first time in months. He saw the woman he'd met in college, the one he'd married in a small but beautiful ceremony, the one he'd planned an entire life with. But he also saw the woman who'd betrayed him repeatedly, who'd laughed at him behind his back, who'd been willing to destroy everything for an affair with a married coworker. The second image completely overwrote the first. I've already called a lawyer, Cameron said simply. I've got a meeting set for Thursday. I want a divorce, Natalie. There's nothing left to discuss. The shock on her face was palpable. You already called? Today? Her voice was a disbelieving whisper. But you only found out today. How can you have already decided? Cameron stood up from the sofa, finally moving. He walked over to where Natalie knelt and stopped in front of her, looking down. I decided the moment I read those messages. There's no going back, Natalie. You destroyed everything. You chose to destroy everything. And now you'll have to live with the consequences. He walked to the living room door, then stopped and turned one last time. I'll be staying at my brother's. You can stay here tonight, but tomorrow I want you to pack your things and go somewhere else. Talk to your parents, talk to a friend, I don't care. But I don't want you here when I come back tomorrow afternoon. Natalie cried out behind him, a desperate, primal sound. Cameron, please. Don't do this. I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you. He didn't respond. He just grabbed his car keys and left, closing the door gently behind him, leaving Natalie alone in the room, broken and shattered. The days that followed were a haze of legal procedures and unpleasant revelations. Cameron hired one of the best divorce attorneys he could find, a seasoned lawyer who'd handled infidelity cases before. During their initial consultation, Cameron presented all the evidence, screenshots of the conversations, photos, videos, everything meticulously organized. The attorney said that despite the pain, the process had a good chance of resolving smoothly, since there were no children involved and the proof of infidelity was solid and undeniable. Cameron also discovered, through an accountant he hired, that Natalie had used their joint credit card to pay for hotels, expensive dinners, and even gifts for Dylan. Thousands of dollars spent on the affair, money Cameron had worked hard to earn. As the divorce moved forward, other things came to light. Through a colleague who worked near the clinic, Cameron learned that Dylan had a reputation as a womanizer. He'd been involved with other staff members before, and his marriage had been on the rocks for years. Dylan's wife, a successful attorney, apparently knew about his affairs but chose to ignore them for the sake of their 2 young children. Cameron felt bad for her, stuck in an unhappy marriage because of the kids, unaware her husband was continuing his affairs without remorse. He decided, using an anonymous social media profile, to send Dylan's wife all the evidence he had of the affair with Natalie. She deserved to know the truth, just as he had. The bomb exploded at the clinic 2 weeks later. Dylan's wife confronted him publicly in the clinic parking lot, in front of patients and staff. She shouted, cried, threw divorce papers in his face, and announced she was taking the kids and half of everything they owned. The scene was so embarrassing that patients stopped to watch, some even filmed it on their phones, and within days the story became the main topic among staff and in the local medical community. The clinic's management received patient complaints about the inappropriate environment and was pressured to act immediately. Dylan tried to downplay it, claiming it was all lies, but the evidence was irrefutable. The clinic's administrative board called an emergency meeting to address the situation, as relationships between staff, especially those involving unethical behavior, violated the institution's code of conduct. Natalie was summoned as well. She initially denied everything, but when screenshots were presented, including messages exchanged inside Dylan's own office and photos taken on clinic premises, she had no choice but to admit it. The clinic's director, a conservative man with strict views on professional ethics, made it clear he wouldn't tolerate such behavior. Dylan was immediately fired for violating multiple institutional policies and for using clinic resources for inappropriate personal purposes. Natalie was given an ultimatum: resign voluntarily or be fired with a permanent mark on her professional record. She chose to resign, but the difference was only semantic. Everyone in the local medical community knew what had happened. Cameron watched it all from a distance, without interfering, without comment. He didn't feel satisfaction at the destruction of their lives, but he didn't feel guilt either. They'd made choices, and choices had consequences. His own life was being rebuilt. He moved into a smaller but comfortable apartment closer to the office. He threw himself into work with renewed intensity, taking on bigger projects, traveling when needed, and rebuilding his identity outside the failed marriage. He started going to the gym again, something he'd abandoned after getting married. He lost weight, gained muscle, and improved his physical and mental health. Friends who drifted away during his marriage began reappearing, realizing Cameron was single and available again. 6 months after the discovery, the divorce was finalized. The house was sold, assets divided, joint accounts closed. The settlement ended up being more favorable to Cameron, partly due to the documented history of infidelity and partly because he'd covered most of the household and mortgage expenses during the marriage. Natalie didn't contest it, likely out of shame or on the advice of her own lawyer that she had no solid grounds to fight. Cameron signed the final papers without emotion. There were no tears, no lingering anger, just relief. Relief that this chapter was finally over. Through mutual acquaintances, he heard that Natalie was struggling. She couldn't find work at local clinics, her reputation was ruined. The medical community was small, and gossip traveled fast. She was taking temporary jobs, earning far less than before, and living in a small apartment shared with a roommate. Dylan had dumped her as soon as the scandal broke, blocking her number and refusing any contact. He was embroiled in a messy divorce with his own wife, fighting for custody of their children and facing the possibility of paying substantial alimony. The promises he'd made Natalie, to leave his wife and build a life together, turned out to be exactly what Cameron suspected, empty lies told to keep the affair going. A year after the discovery, Cameron was unrecognizable. He'd been promoted at work and now led a team on large-scale projects. He had a healthy exercise routine, renewed hobbies, and an active social circle. He'd started dating someone new, an architect he'd met at a professional conference. She was smart, funny, and above all, transparent. Cameron didn't trust easily anymore. The scars of betrayal were still there, but he was learning to give chances again, cautiously. The life he'd built after Natalie was better in almost every way. It was authentic, without lies or hidden agendas. One Saturday afternoon, Cameron was at a cafe with his new girlfriend when he spotted Natalie across the street. She looked different, thinner, with a tired, washed-out expression. She wore simple clothes and carried grocery bags from a discount supermarket. For a moment, their eyes met. Natalie stopped, froze, as if seeing a ghost. Cameron felt no anger, no sadness, nothing but mild indifference. He gave a brief, polite wave, distant but courteous, and turned his attention back to the woman beside him, who was animatedly telling a story about a project she was working on. Natalie stood there a few seconds longer, then lowered her head and kept walking, disappearing into the crowd. Cameron never thought about that encounter again. Natalie had become a distant memory, a lesson learned, a chapter closed. He'd trusted completely, and that trust had been shattered in the worst possible way. But he'd survived. More than that, he'd thrived. The betrayal that should have broken him ended up freeing him from a relationship that was a sham. He now understood the value of honesty, transparency, and integrity in a relationship. And he wouldn't settle for anything less. While Natalie was still dealing with the wreckage of what she'd lost, Cameron was building something new, something real, something worth having. And that made all the difference. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.